Assalamu alaikum and greetings. Welcome. My name is Bilal Davis, and I'm a grad student at Middlesex University, Dubai. I'm also a teacher, and I've been an administrator in Dubai. I've been here for about 8 years, working in many different schools, mostly Emirati schools. And I have about 15 years of experience in education. In this series, I'm talking about the ethics of care and how this concept can be applied in schools in any framework in any communities of practice. So each part, I'm just talking a little bit about my research, and it's especially poignant till today where we're going through COVID-19 and there's an issue of well-being. So also we can have a little bit of discussion about how the ethics of care can even help with the pandemic situation. But let's continue on from my last video. You can always go back to my last video that I posted on LinkedIn or Facebook to see what the last post was, part one was. So, part two, we're continuing with ethics of care, theorizing morality in education, and attachment for in service teachers. So there are many theoretical perspectives for veteran and novice teachers to consider the ethic of care in today's classrooms. Falkenberg states that there are three categories of ethics of care concerning a theory of morality. These are a relational ontology, a concern for human needs, and a subscription to particularism. The fast category deals with a human's ability to know right from wrong. And second, humans are socially dependent beings that rely on each other for prosperity, hence, relational theory by Neil Nonnings. And thirdly, it depends on the situation on which a priority is taken over morals. Ethics based education is morality in education. Um, Students need to be indoctrinated with it in order to practice a virtue as a way of life. And I think we went over that part already, but I'll continue anyway. Falkenberg suggests that this is a way to create a learning environment of morality. Teacher must work hard to promote a highly refined ethic of care program. Teachers must work hard to model, connect with students, and promote values of ethics of care. Developmental discipline, which is derived from attachment theory, requires teachers to provide a supportive, nurturing environment with fair classroom rules and standards for behavior. Students will adhere to them, especially with the most challenging behavior students. The drawback is that without the use of rewards and punishments, uh, uh, is that it takes time and caution on the part of the teacher. So, ethics of care will take a long time to see the improvements in the classroom because you're not using rewards and punishments. So, I do caution you for this. Students can be trained to obey classroom rules in order to get rewards and to escape punishment. However, students do not cultivate from within the motivational knowledge of their actions because it relies on bribes and threats that depend on authority, obedience, um, and this is not the best way. So the findings related to the relevant studies was regarding caring centered management. Several studies have found teachers tackle problems through one-to-one relationships with students and held every student accountable and interacted culturally appropriate ways. And it also requires developing relationships, abstain from behavioral management, and implemented a culturally relevant pedagogy. Now, this is where we were supposed to begin. So, ethics of care as a framework for preparing pre service teachers. Care ethics allows a conceptual framework through which we can study realities of co teaching relationships and how it builds relationships during student teaching, where this is the most important thing when it comes to moral learning. Learning to care is the primary goal of education, as well as a positive student learning outcomes. Instead of minimizing or disregarding education theory, teacher candidates should deepen their knowledge and practice of education theory for classroom management. And these are my findings in the relevant studies. In a particular case study of a teacher candidates, teacher candidates, pre-service teachers recognize the highest goal of developing a caring community for classroom management methods, reinventing conventional methods, and constructing their plans that articulate multiple subjects which require the linking theory to practice. Class management was one way in which they did this. It was inseparable from everything they did in the classroom. Creative, creating a care and positive learning environment became paramount. Ultimately, the goal of advancing a caring community became the core of their lessons objectives. And here is a synthesis of the sources, including commentary in relation to my project and the research questions. There were many aspects of the research and literature which required analysis and synthesis to understand the complexities of ethics of care. For example, traditional moral education is not taught through a structured scientific approach, but open learning where the teacher uses caring as a method to prepare students to learn to care. Additionally, in care ethics, building relationships is the way that our exposures to schooling has a long term impact on our thinking habits. The way teachers can do this in their modeling practice, do this is by modeling their practice, dialogue, and confirmation. This comes from Noddings. Synergy is an important aspect to consider. Co-teaching is one of the ways teachers can develop interdependence, caring, and synergistic relationships. Teachers find that it is very difficult and challenging to implement classroom management. Therefore, they often get even more discouraged about education theory. So it is essential to lean on colleagues with similar mindset. Teachers should change their mindset about gaining and maintaining control of their students, but rather implement a caring community where where students incorporate self-management strategies. So this can be a caring community, um, communities of practice of caring. Teachers were prepared to go beyond the norm of a reward and punishment system. Instead, teachers should create peaceful and efficient learning environments by intentionally developing caring classroom communities. Now, there's a lot of criticism of the person who developed ethics of care, and I will not go into that. You can look at that on your own, and I do not agree with Nell Noddings and where she comes from. But I feel that it was important to take the concept that was developed because ethics of care just didn't pop out of anywhere. You know, this was developed from many other educational theorists from the past. So it just doesn't all rely, you know, on Nell Noddings. So my commentary on the relation to the project, and Nell Noddings, with the current situation and crisis in today's schools, Teachers must be creative and innovative. While I appreciate the criticism of Notting's work, I also understand the dynamic and provocative ideas she presents. Um, like Nodding's, I rely on my experiences as a parent, in my ideas. However, um, she focuses on the role and nurturing of the mother, and but we know caring can be all of us. It can be men and women. I am caring, and I have taken on a dispositional role of being nurturing. It is interesting that even though Noddings' caring is exclusively in this particular category, Nell Noddings used many theories, like I said before, from male theorists and philosophers. I agree with Noddings that the role of a mother is more nurturing than a father, perhaps. And I would like to incorporate that spirituality into my work. And this spirituality is dealing with, do you have that human spirit within you that you connect with other people and you know how to treat other people? And so, when we deal with, especially when we deal with particular religions, for instance, for Muslims, when we have that spirituality, we want to treat others, the way Allah tells us to treat others. And we want to gain the favor of Allah. So, we want to incorporate this spirituality in our lesson, in our life. So we want to have that compassion with our teachers. We want to have that compassion with our students. So incorporating what that spirituality that you have into your work, and just on a human level, just connecting with other people is very powerful. Also, as a male elementary teacher, school teacher before, I was continually reflecting on the aspects of and elements noted in her works. Ultimately, this process led me to engage in action research project based on the ethics of care in my classroom. And my conclusion on that was that care ethics urges educators to concentrate management steps on cultivating a relationship with every individual student. That's that inclusion, which requires reaching out and teaching them ways to care for others and relationships. Incorporating spirituality into their practice is dynamic because listening to others and providing encouragement to others, and believing in others' ability to do their best will enhance an ethic of care in learning communities. And the benefit of taking on the challenging task of nurturing, caring in schools is that it equips students to become citizens who recognize the needs of others and reach towards helping one another. And let's see if we have any more room, or should I continue another time? So let's go deeper and get some more information into ethics of care. Ethics of care, in many instances, is a murky and elusive phrase. Kentel notes that there are misunderstandings and misconceptions about what it means, notably how teachers demonstrate ethics of care. There are many questions that surface around the notion and idea of ethics of care, such as what does it mean for teachers to care about and care for their students? In addition to this, there is scant literature available about its application or implementation in UAE classrooms. So, the research purpose and aims of my project. The purpose of this research was to explore developing and implementing ethics of care in my fifth grade classroom that I taught through the use of action research. um, Professional practitioners can investigate an issue or dilemma in their classroom, such as ethics of care, and they can consider the use of an intervention to address the issue and solve an existing problem or dilemma. So, you know, once teachers identify, and this is action research. So, if you want to go into a graduate program, such as Middlesex University today, you're going to do action research, and this is what you're going to be doing, and this is the purpose of your action research. So once you teachers identify a problem, the next step is finding a solution. So you're going to be doing action research, you'll find a problem, and you'll try to go to the next step, which is finding a solution. This process begins with analyzing needs, establishing a research plan, writing a literature review, providing an intervention, collecting the data, and reflectively analyzing the results. Through action research, this study aims to examine how a teacher might intervene and if they can prompt students to care about their learning, as well as to engage and participate in their learning community. And um, the researcher, I expected to use the findings yielded in the study to reflect, improve, and professionally develop my teaching practices. And I felt these findings should also add value to a growing body of research in this area. I'm going to skip the concept of the research questions and how I did my data, because that's really for someone to read. And I'm going to move on to the next part. So, ethics of care action research findings. So, there were 12 responses to the survey I put out. The average time to complete the study took 17 minutes and 24 seconds. And after 1 week of investigations on from the surveys, the teachers closed answers and no more participants were allowed. And the first question looked at whether the teacher researcher provided adequate learning support for ELL students, and the respondents all answered 83% yes, which was a huge win. And at my school that I was at, we were using that I am at. I'm sorry, we were using Freckle and Achieve 3000 programs, um, used as an intervention for students and as a tool for flexible learning. Some students did not respond well to these programs, but more intervention was needed from the learning support team, which is normal. The second question looked at whether the teacher promoted students getting along with others, helping and supporting each other. And the respondents answered 83% yes, they can see that. The teacher always encouraged collaboration and conflict management. Students were encouraged to share how they felt in the student care boxes. They were also free to either leave a message in the teacher's box or speak to him directly. Third question looked at whether the teacher responded to and interacted with students in culturally appropriate ways. The respondents answered 92% yes and 8% no. The teacher embraced the Emirati culture and valued the individual cultures in the classroom. Lesson plans incorporated connections to Emirati culture if possible. The fourth question in my survey looked at whether the teachers use spirituality to relate, listen, and understand students. And the respondents answered 67% yes and 33% no. The teacher used teachings from Islam in the cultural context to use compassion for his students and to make sure that students had the right to be treated equally and with respect. He valued student knowledge and gave credit when the student knew more than the teacher. The fifth question looked at whether the teacher demonstrated positive dispositions, such as welcoming, gratitude, and empowering students. The respondents answered 83% yes and 17% no. The teacher communicated high expectations to students. He welcomed their ideas and encouraged students to extend their learning by using technology. The sixth question looked at whether a co-teacher and teacher model positive relationships and caring with each other to students. And 67 of the percent of the respondents said yes, and 33% said no. Each teacher spoke with respect to one another. They also encouraged their students to show respect towards the co teacher. When one teacher saw the other make a mistake, the other was able to point out this error in a collaborative way. Teachers showed appreciation for support, and I appreciate my co teacher in the fifth grade. I okay. The seventh question looked at whether there was evidence of fair classroom rules or agreements. 67% of respondents answered yes, and 33 answered no. Um, the teacher implemented fair agreements. The main agreement was to care about themselves, to care for others, and care for their community. If students consistently did not do classwork, did not do homework, did not seek permission to leave the classroom, students understood that they would be placed on a behavior management plan. They realized that this was not a punishment, but a means of support. The eighth question looked at whether the teacher established one to one relationships with students. 50% answered yes, and 50% answered no. The teacher took an interest in students' hobbies, their families, the area that they live, for example. The teacher noticed students' gifts and talents and encouraged students to develop them. The ninth question looked at whether the teacher held all students accountable for their learning and behavior. 50% of respondents said yes, and 50% of respondents said no. The teacher contacted parents when students did not complete their assignments. The teacher also checked in with their parents about their child's behavior. The teacher could have done a better job of contacting parents more frequently about missing assignments and poor student effort towards their work. The teacher assigned homework on the school portal as well as communication apps, and the Classcraft app, which I use with my parents, sent to parents and students of project due dates, benchmark assessments, and external examinations. The teacher did not mention all of the assessments because of the students were adequately prepared in class. The teacher emphasized to parents the importance of not cramming and memorizing information. However, assessments were needed in order to plan for the curriculum. So that was always something that I um, spoke about. The teacher encouraged students to care about their effort on the exam and make an effort to improve on their tests. The 10th question looked at whether the teacher balanced the flexibility of thinking with consistency in decision making. And the respondents answered 65% yes and 63% no. The teacher respected the students' free time and need to have fun. If students missed a PE lesson or an art lesson, the teacher offered that time when it was available. When students were finished with their examinations, they did not rush through it. Students were allowed to use their devices to read and play a game and do something interesting as long as they were quiet and cared about others. The 11th question looked at whether the teacher encouraged a caring community of learning in the classroom, and 100% answered yes. It was evident in conversations with students, reminders on the whiteboard, care boxes in the classroom, and students made improvements in their relationships in the classroom. Students enjoy collaborating in groups and helping each other understand concepts. The 12th question looked at whether the teacher created a caring, positive learning environment. And okay, and that's 67% said yes, and 33% answered no. The 13th question looked at whether the teacher reinvented conventional methods for classroom management. 67% answered yes, and 33% answered no. The teacher used the caring boxes in order to address behavior issues, sometimes in order not to disturb the instruction. Also, the teacher had many talks with students about why a particular act was not appropriate for class instruction time. He also expressed openly how he cared for students' learning and that everyone should respect each other's right to learn. The teacher viewed himself as a coach and a mentor in order to get students to realize that they can self manage themselves, and students also elected their leaders for classroom management. The 14th question looked at whether there was evidence that the teacher constructed methods to articulate subjects requiring linking theory to practice, and 91% answered yes. 9% answered no. The teacher always took an opportunity to incorporate care in every subject. The teacher also used the ethics of care as a practice to teach math to students, which was his most challenging subject to teach students. It was also his least favorite subject. However, he used the ethics of care to link math to real life situations for students. The 15th question, how many more do we have to go? Looked at whether there was evidence of open learning about moral education, teaching students to learn to care. 73% answered yes, 27 answered no. Moral education subject was taught as a Ministry of Education requirement. However, the teacher made connections to the subject matter, student classroom behavior, and the most important learning, which is what it means to care. The 16th question looked at whether the teacher made an effort towards building positive relationships for positive exposure to schooling and long term positive impacts on students' thinking habits. 83% answered yes, and 17% answered no. The teacher shared this learning journey as a grad student at university. He also shared his love for the Turkish language and traveling. The teacher reinforced the idea that having a good education allows them to choose their career and lifestyle they want. The 17th question looked at whether the teacher demonstrated self management strategies for students um, that went beyond the norm of reward and punishment system. 83% answered yes, and 17% answered no. 83% answered yes. Okay, so it was noted that these self management strategies took time to see results. However, students did start to make improvements in their self control. The 18th question looked at whether the self management strategies created a peaceful and efficient learning environment. 50% answered yes, and 50% answered no. And some educators might view practical learning by the amount of content the students learned or even the number of skills being mastered in the curriculum. However, they may miss the essential skills, which are life skills. Peaceful is also very subjective because it also depends on a person's definition of the word. A loud, boisterous classroom does not mean that no learning is taking place. The 19th question looked at whether there was an opportunity to see some results and impacts of these caring methods and strategies on students. 50% answered yes, and 50% answered no. And the 20th question looked at whether the respondents observed improvements in students' care for learning, caring about themselves, and caring about their learning community. 50% answered yes, and 50% answered no. The teacher took into consideration that ethics of care and the implementation is immediate. However, outcomes may not be so apparent to everyone. And this feedback from the survey pointed out that the teacher still had some areas that needed improvement. The teacher researcher looked at this as a positive feedback because this ultimate goal was to improve his teaching practice. And I will go on to the conclusions and future directions for implementation of this ethics of care in the classroom, and then we will stop there, and we will go on my next part of the series. So, the conclusion and future directions for implementation of ethics of care in a classroom. The teacher did not feel a push for inclusion, inclusive school environment from all of the principals. The teacher did, however, think that the principals use empowering relationship strategies at times. He did not feel fully supported in the implementation of ethics of care. It is challenging to convince middle level leaders and senior leaders to see that students must have the autonomy to decide for themselves about their values, thus empowering them to make the right decisions for themselves. There were limitations of the projects because the leadership wanted to see quick results in students' behavior and were mainly focused on the implementation of required teaching strategies. Also, it was noted that the administration approved of traditional forms of bribes and threats that depended on authority and obedience. The teacher researcher was a firm believer that the benefit of taking on the challenging task of nurturing caring in his classroom was that it equipped students to become citizens who recognize the needs of others and reach towards helping uh, one another. This project was done so that the teacher, which is the one carer, could learn to meet the needs of every student the one cared for. And it took a lot of effort. The teacher experience that part of the ethics of care is that it's also he is the care for himself. So in essence, the one carer, which is the teacher, can also become the self care for. And this is the term that I coined, the self cared for at the same time. The teacher can get burnt out very quickly. The ethics of care in a primary classroom takes a lot of patience and a particular disposition. In this case, the teacher had moved to secondary school in a position that suited his experience. He had already implemented ethics of care in his classroom agreements in high school and was very excited to compare the ethics of care in primary school to boys' secondary high school. Um, and I will say that I have implemented ethics of care in high school. In the start, I let them know what care was, and I also had acronyms, which I will share with you guys. I'll post them, um, and acronyms that stand for care. Um, and the students could see these things, and then when I saw behaviors in the classroom that I wanted to discourage, I would go back to my acronyms and say, okay, so the C stands for conflict resolution. So how do you think that you could handle that better? How do you think you can handle that situation better? Or if I saw something that I wanted to encourage, then I said, that's excellent. You challenged yourself. And that's coming from the letter C. That's critical thinking. So, ethics of care was embedded into the classroom and embedded into the teaching. Yes, that is how I incorporated it in the high school level. A lot my students are encouraged to take responsibility in their own learning because I feel that when they take responsibility in their own learning, they are going to be prepared for the future. If there is nothing else that they can learn in high school is how to be responsible for themselves because once they go into college or university or into their careers, they're not going to have mommy and daddy there to make sure that they're doing everything that they're supposed to do. So you give them that you push them out of that zone of proximity, and you push them slightly out of their comfort zone, and you wink at the parents and let them know that I've got the child. Don't worry. But you push the child outside of the comfort zone and you let them feel that they might fail. They might fail the class because they're not coming to class or they're not submitting their assignments. And this teaches the students that there is a consequence for not turning in their assignments, for not attending a test, for not studying for a test. That no, you're not going to be able to retake the test. That grade is going to stand. For parents to not be able to come to the school at the end of the year and try to get grades to be changed. We need to make sure that everyone understands that we have to take the responsibility from the beginning in the learning and teach this concept throughout the whole year. So at the end of the year, it's not a surprise when we say, no, absolutely not. The grades will not be changed. Your child deserves these grades. So that's just my opinion on it. Next, and based on my practices and the research, and my observations, and it's just my observation only. And next week we can talk about the outcomes and impacts of my study. I look forward to you joining me again. Please share this with others. And until then, see you soon.